So all the questions are not yet. Can we start? We start. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's press conference on the new proposals to fight corruption, which have been adopted today. You will find more information in our press release, questions and answers, and the fact sheet. The High Representative, Vice President Borrell, Vice President Jourova and Skinas, and Commissioner Johansson will present today's proposals, which will strengthen the fight against corruption in the EU and worldwide. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the High Representative Borrell, because he will also need to leave at 1:20. High Representative, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you have said, it's in the European Union and beyond. This anti-corruption package shows that we are determined to fight against corruption at home and beyond, worldwide. And we send a clear message that we are not open to engage with corruption wherever it occurs. We do a lot already in our external action to prevent and fight against corruption. We do so with our partners, countries, and in the multilateral fora. Our support focuses on public administration reform, sound public financial management, capacity building for law enforcement, supporting judicial authorities, and establishing and strengthening specialized anti-corruption bodies. In the Western Balkans, for example, we work with the OSCE to support the building of a stronger track record of investigations, prosecutions, and final conviction on corruption. In Latin America, through we call it PACTO program, European Latin American Program of Assistance Against Transactional Organized Crime. There are a lot of examples in order to show how do we contribute to security and justice in the continent by supporting the fight against transnational organized crime, with corruption being a cross-cutting area of our work. In our eastern neighborhood, together with the OECD, we are also working on the prevention of corruption by supporting the reform of public administration and public financial management. We also provide support to civil society, to the media, to the whistleblowers, and human rights defenders. These are examples of how do we work with Transparency International, also with the program SANCUS, strengthening accountability networks among civil society, in order to support accountability, public institutions, empowering civil society to demand systemic change to address accountability and anti-corruption deficits. Serious acts of corruption can also threaten peace and international security, enabling terrorism, organized crime, and other crimes. So that's why we have to enlarge our scope and to go to tackle corruption worldwide. Based on this framework, the European Union could ban perpetrators of acts of corruption from entering the European Union, to freeze perpetrators' assets in the European Union, and prohibit any European Union person from making funds and economic resources available to perpetrators. Allow me to clarify that this is a Council decision, and it is to the member states in the Council to decide on the adoption of this regime and then on how to use it. And I am fully aware that there are different perspectives on the use of our common foreign and security policy sanctions to target corruption. This is also why it is so important to address both the internal and external dimension in parallel, and that's what this package means. Preaching by example and asking for the same requirements inside and outside. But it's up to the member states to decide on a council decision. Then there is the regulation of how to implement this decision. And I said I am very much aware that it will be a discussion among the member states in the council, but I am confident that the sanctions proposal that I am submitting to the council right now, today, immediately after the debate in the Commission, will provide a useful impetus for the member states to consider, to approve, and to be a step forward on the fight against corruption. I am sure that the work of the Commission today will be the basis for a fruitful discussion in the Council.
Thank you very much, High Representative Vice President Jourova.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let me enter the internal dimension of today's package, because in the EU itself we have a serious problem. I would compare corruption with cancer, which also needs a lot of prevention, but also when prevention fails, then the proper treatment. Unfortunately, we do not have a magic pill against corruption, but we have to do much more, and we have to adopt this package and do many things at the member states level, because what we hear and what we see, corruption is killing our democracy, it's killing the trust of people in democratic institutions. The package will raise the bar in the sense of EU-wide definitions and penalties of corruption crimes, and will help authorities to catch and punish the criminals, be it from public or private sector, no matter where they happen. We see a lot of differences between national definitions of corruption, too big, and also the penalties attached to them. This makes also cross-border investigations more difficult and creates loopholes that are used by criminals. Corruption is by its nature difficult to quantify, so here we also rely on the public opinion. So I will give you maybe four data from 2022. Almost 70% of Europeans believe that corruption is widespread in their country. Only 30% believe that their governments fight corruption effectively. Police is by far the most trusted body to deal with corruption, according to Eurobarometer. And 40% of people report to us that they find it useless to report because they do not believe that the cases, the reported cases, will be properly investigated. These are not very promising figures. Today's package fits into our overall efforts to protect the rule of law. As you know, we cover the anti-corruption efforts of the member states as one of the parameters which we cover by the rule of law report. The next one will come in July this year. And so this was one important step forward, but with today's package we come with very concrete measures. Additionally, we will soon table a proposal for an interinstitutional ethics body to serve as an example for our member states, as a culture of transparency and integrity is key to prevent corruption. Let me add a few words, about the World Media Freedom Day, because this is today. I would like to pay tribute to journalists, you here, your colleagues on the different fronts, especially the front line in Ukraine under Russian bombs, all those taking risks to inform us. So big congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Vice President Snas.
Thank you. As Vera just said, corruption is not only a scourge on society, it's also a threat on our democracies. And we will continue to fight it relentlessly at the European level. And our agencies, Europol and Eurojust, this morning had offered us a very tangible example of this fight. They have very successfully, working alongside German, Belgian, and Italian authorities, delivered a lightning strike, as was the name of the operation, against the Drangheta organized crime syndicate rooted in Calabria, Operation Eureka, with over 100 arrests. I want to start these remarks by congratulating wholeheartedly Europol and Eurojust and national authorities involved. This paints an important backdrop of the package we're presenting you today. The set of proposals you have in front of you are an important branch of our work under our broader security union work and follow also the lines of the strategy for organized crime, which we presented with ILVA back in 2021. What we're doing today is rewriting a legislation which is old. It's over 2 decades old. And under the existing rules, member states are required to criminalize active and passive corruption, but only on bribery-related offenses. These instruments are not enough. So today, we are proposing to criminalize all forms of corruption in all member states, not only bribery, but also trafficking in influence, illicit enrichment, embezzlement, and abuse of power. We are also placing strong emphasis on prevention. There is the need for a new culture of integrity that applies horizontally across the European Union and, of course, to the EU institutions, as Vera said, in view of our forthcoming proposals on the interinstitutional ethics body, a discussion on which the Commission starts from a very high point. So this is what we are doing today. We cannot ask member states to do this alone. They have to do it together with us, together with our agencies, but we have to do it at a level that is convincing, which is not fragmented as it was up to now. And it's not an accident that we have introduced corruption-related considerations, not only on the annual rule of law report, but also on the economic semester process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before moving on to Commissioner Johansson, the High Representative would like to say some words.
Excuse me, colleagues, but I have to leave. But before leaving, I think on behalf of all of us, to express our sadness about the tragic shooting in the school in Belgrade this morning, where at least 9 persons, including 8 children, were killed. We want to express our deep condolences to the families and close ones of the victims and wish a speedy recovery to the wounded. That's a very sad news. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Commissioner Johansson, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as already been mentioned by Vera, corruption is a huge problem in our society and a huge threat. I should say also when it comes to the link to the organized criminal groups, they're cracking down on Sky ECC and Encrochat was an eye-opener to see how widely spread corruption is and how much the organized criminal groups are using corruption. At least 60% of the organized criminal groups active in the European Union use corruption as a regular tactic. And corruption is also increasingly cross-border. The organized criminal groups are almost never only active in one member state. They are almost always cross-border. And that means that the corruption cases also are cross-border. We had more than 500 such cases that Eurojust supported only the last 6 years. And too many think that corruption is a victimless crime, but that is not true. Vera just mentioned how corruption is killing democracy and trust, I think you said. But it's also killing people. Remember the 11-year-old girl that was shot dead in Antwerp last January. Her death is due to the gang violence fueled by corruption. According to Europol, corruption is the key enabler of criminal infiltration, particularly for drug trafficking. The result of drug trafficking is gang violence on European streets, and that also means that the killing in our streets has a close connection to corruption. Victims also include those who dare investigate corruption. Just think of Daphne Galicia Caruana in Malta and Jan Kuciak in Slovakia. Journalists brave enough to challenge those involved in corruption, they pay the ultimate price. That is why we are presenting today's new directive on combating corruption. Cohesion, trust, rule of law, all these improve when we address corruption. Our proposal today establishes an EU network against corruption that will be under my responsibility and have its first meeting already in September. One of the first tasks will be to assess risk areas for corruption. They will work closely together with our agencies, Europol, Eurojust, EPPO and OLAF, and of course with the Member States. In the new directive, this is the first time ever that we have a directive that covers both public and private sectors. In the directive, we were harmonizing the definitions of corruption, and we are also harmonizing all kinds of corruption that should be criminalized. In this proposal, we go further, even further than the UN Convention Against Anti-Corruption. Today, only bribery is criminalized on the EU level. But with this proposal, as also Margrethe mentioned, we will also cover misappropriation, trading in influence, abuse of function, obstruction of justice, and illicit enrichments related to corruption. But we are also increasing and harmonizing sanctions. Today, between our member states, bribery sanctions can differ from 3 months up to 15 years. And that means too much obstacles for the investigation and police cooperation that is cross-border. Now we are proposing a significant higher, lowest level of maximum penalties. This proposal also harmonizes how the judiciary can take into account the broader societal damage, the so-called aggravating circumstances. For example, an aggravating circumstance is if the offender is a high-level official or exercises law enforcement or judicial functions. An aggravating circumstance is if the offence is committed for the benefit of a third country. An aggravating circumstance is if the offence is carried out within an organised crime group. For the above definitions and sanctions to work, we must have effective investigative tools, and we are giving law enforcement those tools. The model is the fight against organised crime, where the tools are strong. We also harmonise when it comes to the regulation of immunity. In investigations, immunity of privilege from prosecution can be a barrier. Members of Parliament and other public officials may have immunity, which helps strengthen their independence, but it's important, and I propose here, that Member States should ensure that immunity can be lifted through an effective and transparent process pre-established by law and that is concluded in a reasonable time frame. In the proposal, we also propose minimum limitation periods for criminal offences. And this is today really an obstacle. If you read the rule of law report that we present every year, you can see that in almost all member states we have very few prosecutions on corruption, especially on high level, and very few convictions. And that is, of course, because the investigations are always or almost very complicated and takes long time. That's why it's important that the limitation periods allow sufficient time to bring corruption offence to justice. Today, these limits can vary widely between member states, from 3 years to 25 years. Now we are proposing higher limitation periods and harmonising them. And also, to remind you again on the rule of law report, last year was the first time the Commission presented recommendations in the rule of law report. 70% of the recommendations were related to anti-corruption. And I think this also shows that there's a lot of more things that we need to be done. We propose here in our today also the establishment of specialized anti-corruption bodies in all member states that are trusted, independent and well-funded. This is just a short of this new directive. When we are presenting this new directive, we are taking out 2 old legislative files and replacing them with this new directive that will cover a wider range of corruption and also criminalizing all forms of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now I would like to open the floor for your questions. Please present yourself and the media you're working for, and we will give priority to the colleagues in the room. Maria, you're first.
Hello, thank you for the floor, Anita. Maria Psara with Εφημερίδα των Συντακτών Greece. This question is mainly for Vice President Jourova, and it is about the media freedom. Today, the Reporters Without Frontiers Index placed Greece into the last place between the EU states for the media freedom. So my first question is, if you take seriously under account this ranking, if you trust it. Secondly, if you are concerned. And third, what will the Commission do for the media freedom in Greece? And since we're here now discussing about media freedom, we had some good news from Greece about the Giorgos Karaivas assassination case. I would like a comment from you, Mr. Executive Vice President, but also from Vice President Skinas. Thank you.
Maybe the good news first. We are following closely from the public sources how the investigations of the murder of Giorgos Karaivas is ongoing. And so this is a very good news that finally justice has a response, that the 2 suspects have been detained and now they are waiting for the fair trial. So this is very important, as well as it was important in the case of Jan Kuciak and Daphne Caruana Galizia, who were mentioned here, because at the moment when the murders of journalists will go unpunished, it will be very, very bad signal how we are able to guarantee the security or are not able to guarantee security of the journalists. On the ranking, we took note of the new edition of the ranking. We also work with some other surveys. Mainly, we work with the Media Pluralism Monitor, which is the source for our rule of law report, the chapter on media. But coming to Greece, I was in Greece to discuss the situation of media. I talked to the authorities. I had a privilege to speak to the Prime Minister, to several ministers, to the representatives responsible for working in the direction of making the life of journalists more secure in Greece. There has been progress. The law against disinformation was amended. There is a task force to improve the safety of journalists, and I also welcome the support of Greece for the Media Freedom Act. So we will monitor the situation. Of course, the next rule of law report will reflect also how the country is reacting on the appearance of the usage of spyware, which is the case which appeared in the past. As for the spyware, I had very intense discussions in Greece, but also in several other member states, explaining the position of the Commission that the usage of spyware by the private persons is absolutely prohibited, and the usage of spyware by the official authorities in a member state have to have very strong legal reason. And so there must be laws in order in all the member states so that the authorities can follow the legal criteria. Thank you.
Thank you
Yes. Probably, Maria, I should add my own congratulations to the Hellenic police for their success in detaining and charging 2 suspects for the George Karaivas assassination. This is yet another proof that the best thing is for the responsible prosecution services and police authorities to do their job, which they are doing, and also particularly a special thought to you, because you are also a member of the board of SCEA, of the Reporters, National Reporters Union. I think it is a very good news also for the Greek journalists as a whole. Now, for the rest, I think Vera, as the Vice President in charge, was very clear, and I will not add, multiply, or subtract anything from what she said.
Thank you very much. We have the other Maria, then colleagues.
Yes, thank you, Maria Odrescu for La Livre Belgique. On today's proposal, I'm trying to figure out what kind of concrete effect it will have, how it will translate within the fight against corruption within the EU. If we take a concrete example, one problematic country is, for instance, Hungary. A lot of the problems that the EU has pointed in Hungary are linked to the weakness of the fight against corruption. So I would like to know, for instance, how this proposal would have avoided some of the problems that we see now in Hungary. And I do have a second question on the external aspect of the text. I understand the Council needs to adopt the sanctions regime. I was wondering whether the European Commission had already a list of proposals on the specific persons that we should sanction. Thank you.
Yes.
It comes along.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think my colleagues will complement me. Where is the main added value? I find it in the combination of very, I think, proportionate and necessary measures on preventive side and on repressive side. And on preventive side, we want to oblige all the member states, including the member states where there is a long-lasting issue, to ensure adequate resources to prevent and fight corruption, to collect data and monitor enforcement, to adopt rules that so that the public sector is held accountable through open access to information of public interest, disclosure and management of conflicts of interests, and also ensure that law enforcement and prosecutors have appropriate investigative tools to fight corruption. This is more about the law enforcement action than the prevention. We also identified the risky sectors, especially the public procurement, taxes, the sectors where you can see money laundering, cultural goods business, or investor residence and citizenship schemes. And we will be completing this list of risky sectors together with the colleagues from the member states who will be the members of the European Anti-Corruption Network. So I think that our proposal is addressing the core issues and obliges the member states to invest much more in the fight against corruption. And also we oblige the member states to do what we try to do ourselves, to convince the society that we mean it, that corruption is not normal, that the corruption is not acceptable. And by the way, this thing that the corruption is not acceptable is already announced to us through Eurobarometer. It's more than 60% who say we cannot tolerate corruption. So there should be this societal agreement that corruption has to be tackled. And for Hungary, there are also anti-corruption measures required under the milestones connected with conditionality regulation. You know, there are 17 things which Hungary should do, including establishment of the integrity body, transparency of public procurement contracts, and so on. So there are a lot of other measures which should be already being established in Hungary under conditionality. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I also like the question after we presented, when the question comes, but what is really all about? so I will take this challenge. What is all about is to replace a system which has been very fragmented and very outdated, very partial, very elliptical. And we're doing it with, okay, the term has been a bit abused, but I will use it again, in a way which is holistic. That means both the external aspects, for which we do not have a legal regime to sanction individuals and third countries, and internally with, as Silva said, with typifying many more cases that come under the definition corruption, not only bribery, but setting up structures and processes in all member states that will meet under the political authority of our Home Affairs Commissioner, DG Home, to make sure that there is a commonality of purpose with our agencies, Eurojust, Europol, and Olaf. So we are creating a new constellation with a new software, a new regulatory software. And we think it will work.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Very briefly, when this proposal or the new directive is adopted, we will, member states has to comply to a much higher standard when it comes to anti-corruption. And that is, of course, also how they will be evaluated.
Thank you. Vice President.
Yeah, there was the second question on whether there are already some clear candidates for the first listing. Honestly speaking, I don't know. I suspect that the shell is not empty. Otherwise, we would not start such an initiative. So you will see the first listing, which will have to be endorsed by the member states in due time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Vice President Jourova, has the European Union enough credibility to fight against corruption after what we saw in the Qatargate scandal, after what we saw the former Director General of the European Commission taking free flights to Qatar? How far did these scandals erode the credibility in the institutions of the European Union? And my second question is about Hungary. The Hungarian Parliament just passed a package of judicial reforms. What does it mean in the process of restoring the rule of law in Hungary? Thank you.
I seem to be very popular today here. Thank you for your question. Not only today. First of all, on whether there is erosion of credibility. I am convinced that the Qatargate and the case in the EU, in the Commission, were failures of individual people. But it doesn't mean that I don't think two negatives. It doesn't mean that that we should not do more. The third one. That's why we are adopting this anti-corruption package, which is the piece of legislation from the family of the criminal law, which also applies to EU institutions, to EU institution staff and members. It applies, in fact, on cases as we saw with Qatargate, that some people worked in the interest of the external country. So this is the aggravating factor which Ilva spoke about. And we are also now discussing how to increase transparency, because it's unfinished business. We need to do more with the European Parliament and the Council to enable the people, the journalists, those who are interested, to look into what we are doing. In other words, to look back at the system with the transparency register and access to documents. But this is now the work in progress. We also need to establish the interinstitutional ethics body, so we are now finalizing the proposal, which will be soon debated by the highest possible persons of 9 institutions. Next to the Commission, there will be 8 other institutions listed under Article 13 of the treaty. I believe that we need to have such a body to harmonize the main principles and parameters and standards for the ethical issues, and we will discuss with the institutions the scope, the composition, the procedural aspects, and so on. But you didn't ask about the ethics body. I just wanted to confirm that we are working on it. What must work to increase the credibility of the EU institutions? Because on your question, indeed, the Qatar Gate was a very unpleasant and big blow to the credibility of all of us, because the people do not differentiate whether it's one political club in the European Parliament. They, of course, see European institutions as a whole. And so we have to do all that to try to convince people that we mean it, that we want to go more transparent, that we will go after the cases of problematic ethics, but also that we will encourage the law enforcement bodies to go after and investigate properly the corruption cases, which is in fact the core matter in this proposal. On Hungary, yes, we take note that the vote in Hungarian Parliament on the judicial reform is happening today. The judicial reforms which we wanted Hungary to adopt, seeking to also implement the 4 judicial independence milestones of the Hungarian recovery plan. And procedurally speaking, this is a very good step forward, and Hungary is responding on our requests. But it is not the end of the process. Further steps need to follow. We will now analyze the laws adopted, which also still need to enter into force. Also, it is for Hungary to prepare the accompanying implementation steps foreseen in the Hungarian recovery plan. The formal preliminary assessment by the Commission of the legislation concerned and its full implementation under the recovery plan will only be possible after the full set of documents covering all 27 super milestones and targets has been officially submitted by Hungary as part of the first payment request. So it's too early. It might have been more simpler answer.
Thank you. David.
And may I add, because you said, coming back to the listing issue, whether there is somebody in the shelf. Of course, there is no list at this moment. The listing will come, yeah? Not to confuse things. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, David Price, Your Democracy. I have a question about corruption and bribery at the highest level. And unfortunately, Mr. Borrell is not here to deal with the world politics side of it. But I'd like to ask the question anyway. So how is the EU reacting to politically and morally when it has documentary evidence that a major partner is being corrupted by another foreign power, namely China? There's documentary evidence of bank transfers amongst the US president's family from China, and there's email evidence as well. How are you reacting internally, and how are you protecting European citizens?
So Vera says she will leave this to me, which I'm saying I will leave to Josep Borrell when he has the time to answer. This is a very legitimate question that merits an answer, but I think it makes sense that the answer is given from the EAS, and the EAS, the very able EAS press team, is there to help you, David.
Thank you. Next. Yes.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Gregorio Sorgi from Political Europe. I'd like to ask a follow-up question to my colleague's question on Qatar Gate. What additional measures have been, feature in this proposal which would sanction the kind of behavior we've seen in the European Parliament? And also another follow-up question on when we can expect an announcement on the ethics body.
Well, the reaction on the activities of the members of the parliament was seen from the side of the law enforcement bodies. And I think that once there is a suspicion of corruption, there has to come such a reaction. In the Commission, this one case was being tackled as a disciplinary issue, as far as I know. So we are responding and we are reacting on these individual cases. But again, I have to repeat that this is the situation which shows to us that we should look whether the system as such is healthy and whether we should not do more. And we believe we should do more. That's why the ethics body is now in the final stage of the preparation in the Commission. And I hope, I would like to see the adoption of the first proposal now in May, so that we can soon start discussing with the institutions, because I wanted this time to have a staged method. 2 years ago, I sent a letter to the relevant institutions, the 8 institutions, I don't count Commission, with a simple question whether they want to join the interinstitutional ethics body, and the answer from most of them was no. So now I try again and better. In the Parliament, I promised that we will propose something by the end of March, and I did it in the way that I consulted with the presidents or vice presidents of all the relevant institutions, whether this time I will convince them to sit around the table and work together on establishing of the ethics body. And I presented to them this preliminary idea of the Commission, how the ethics body could work. And so now we are finalizing also upon and using the reactions of the institutions, we are finalizing the proposal. And again, I do believe we have it out in May, so that we can discuss further. Mm-hmm. This is not a trivial thing. We are going to establish a new body which will deal with very highly sensitive matters. Not individual cases, because this is not what the Commission is proposing, but with the standards and principles and rules. So we need to invest in proper preparation.
Thank you. We're transitioning now to the platform, and Mose, you are first on our list.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Anita. Yes, we heard that both external and internal dimensions of this anti-corruption package. And I would like to ask a question about what is called state capture, because all this package has expanded, let's say, the corruption crimes. It will cover all types of crimes. So the question is, I wonder if all this together will also be effective against what is called state capture, where, let's say, corruptive politicians and parties are taking control of the government of the state. We know that happens in some EU countries, but it also happened in EU countries, certainly in some candidate countries. And then listening to the second question, because we heard also that currently there are not so many high-level prosecutions in corruption cases. So I wonder if, let's say, the new directive will also authorize the European public prosecutor to launch prosecutions in EU member states. Thank you.
Thank you, Mose. I must admit the sound was not great. I'm looking at Commissioner Johansson if she got the gist of it. It seems so. Otherwise, we would ask you to repeat, Commissioner.
Yes, I hope I heard your questions correctly, but what we will do with this new directive is that member states will be obliged to implement a much higher standard when it comes to the criminalisation, when it comes to the sanctions, when it comes to the limitation periods, and also harmonising the definition of people that should be covered by these individuals, for example, also high officials and politicians, and also that they have to implement these aggravating circumstances. So, for example, if a high politician is found to be corrupted, that should be an aggravating circumstances because that hurts even more into the society. Of course, we should not be naive. A new directive on corruption will not solve all the problems that we have. But it will help, at least and also especially, it will help both EPPO and the law enforcement to do their jobs. And when it comes to EPPO, EPPO is already extremely active, I must say. Have started a lot of investigations that also have come to prosecution. So this is, of course, extremely important role that EPPO is playing, and they will also be an important partner to the new EU anti-corruption network that we will establish.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Momchil.
Good afternoon. My question is to Commissioner Jourova. Commissioner, during the last 2 years, 2 groups of Bulgarian citizens were sanctioned under the U.S. Global Magnitsky Act. So, can we expect the European Union to sanction them after the new regime is adopted?
For the listing and introducing sanctions against individuals, there is a clear set of criteria which have to be present in each individual case, and it will be the matter for the adoption from the side of the Council. So I don't see any space for any kind of reactions or retaliations.
Thank you. Lawrence?
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I have a similar question on Magnitsky. The US and the UK have both included corruption sanctions within their Magnitsky framework on the basis that they often end up targeting the same groups of people. Wondering whether that was considered for the external sanctions on corruption, and if so, why it was not done. Thank you.
I don't know.
I think we will need to come back to you for that type of detail, and I must admit I also did not fully acoustically understand your question, so I'll ask you to come back to us bilaterally. All right, I'm looking once more in the room to see if there are further hands up. I do not see any. With that, I would like to say thank you for your participation. Thank you very much, and a good day.
Thank you very much.